From a childhood spent between the shores of Honolulu and the bustling streets of Jakarta, the early life of Barack Obama is a global journey of identity and ambition. Long before he was the 44th president, he was Barry, a young man navigating a multiracial heritage with a father black as pitch and a mother white as milk. In this video, we're tracing the path of the man who went from a community organizer in Chicago to the first black president of the Harvard Law Review. We'll look at his formative years at Punahou School, his experiments with identity in college, and the grassroots work that paved his way to the Illinois Senate. This is the story of how a kid from Hawaii became a leader on the world stage.
Okay, I want to try a little experiment to kick things off today. I want you to close your eyes for a second. When I say the name Barack Obama, what's the very first image that, downloads into your brain?
Oh, I think for 99% of people, it's the same JPEG. You see the seal of the president,
The motorcade,
the guy in the blue suit behind the podium, pausing for effect. You see the finished product.
Exactly. We see the icon. But today, we are doing something totally different. We're hitting the delete button on the presidency. We're scrubbing the Senate years.
Right.
We were going back to a time when he wasn't Mr. President or even lawyer. We're going back to when he was just Barry.
And honestly, that is the only way to actually understand the man. If you look at the stack of notes, articles, and biographical excerpts we have in front of us today, which cover his life from his birth in 1961 all the way up to the mid-90s, you realize something pretty profound. His political style, it wasn't manufactured in some campaign war room in D.C. It was forged in a really chaotic, messy, and incredibly non-traditional upbringing.
It really is an origin story deep dive today. And I have to say, looking at the source material, the geography we're covering is honestly exhausting just to look at on a map.
It's a lot.
We're bouncing from Honolulu to Jakarta, back to Hawaii, over to LA, then New York, and finally deep into the south side of Chicago. It is not your typical born in a log cabin story.
It is a lot of mileage, physically and culturally. But the mission of this deep dive isn't just to track his frequent flyer miles. We want to connect the dots. We want to figure out how a confused kid named Barry, who was navigating a really complex identity in Southeast Asia and Hawaii, evolved into the first black president of the Harvard Law Review.
And a powerhouse in Chicago politics.
Exactly. We're looking for the specific skills he picked up along the way.
So let's fire up the time machine. We're dropping in on the University of Hawaii. The year is 1960. And we have a meeting that, statistically speaking, it just shouldn't have happened.
That is putting it mildly. You have to remember the context of 1960. The world is a much, much larger place than it is today. And here you have Barack Obama Sr.
Right.
He's the university's very first foreign student from an African nation, specifically from Kenya. He's brilliant, he's charismatic, and he's very, very far from home.
And on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, you have Stanley Ann Dunham, everyone calls her Ann, who is a teenager born in Wichita, Kansas. I'm trying to picture two places more culturally distinct than rural Kenya and Kansas in 1960, and I'm just coming up blank.
It's a massive cultural gulf. But they meet in a Russian language class, of all places. They fall in love, they marry in 1961, and on August 4th, 1961, Barack Hussein Obama II is born.
Now, usually in a standard political biography, this is where you talk about the stable family unit, right? The dinner table conversations that nurture the future leader.
But the sources make it crystal clear. That is not what happens here. This isn't the Cleavers.
Not at all.
No. The father leaves almost immediately to pursue grad school at Harvard. By 1964, the marriage is effectively over, they divorce. But Anne isn't the type to just, settle down. She meets another international student, Lolo Soetoro from Indonesia.
And this triggers a move that I think is the first major pivot point in the sources. In 1967, Barack is 6 years old. And suddenly, he's not in Hawaii anymore. He's in Jakarta.
This era in Indonesia is fascinating because it is so distinct from the typical American political upbringing. We're talking about a developing nation in the late 60s. He's living in a new neighborhood. His stepfather Lolo is a surveyor. His mom's teaching English. But when you look at the details of their daily life and the sources, what really stands out to you?
It's the diversity within the household itself. There's this one specific detail in the research that really stopped me in my tracks. It mentions the family's caretaker, Evie.
Yes, the story of Evie is incredibly telling.
So Evie was a transgender woman. The sources know she was known as Trudy at the time, and met her at a cocktail party, fell in love with her cooking.
Her beefsteak and fried rice. specifically.
And hired her on the spot.
I mean, think about the implications of that for a second. We're talking about 1967, maybe 1968.
Yeah.
You have a young American boy, Barry, being raised in Southeast Asia, and his primary caregiver during the day is a transgender woman who's playing soccer with him and walking him to school.
It's a level of exposure to difference that most American kids in 1968 or even 1998, frankly, just did not get. It feels like his baseline for normal was set so much wider than everyone else's.
It really speaks volumes about his mother, Anne. She was an anthropologist at heart. That lens, the desire to understand people who are different from you rather than fear them, was just baked into Barry's daily existence.
And you see that in his education there, too. It wasn't a straight line.
Not at all. The school situation was a total mix. He does a couple of years at St. Francis of Assisi, which is a Catholic school.
Okay.
Then he switches to the Basuki School, a government-run Muslim school. And then, just to throw another ingredient in the blender, he joins the Cub Scouts.
So it's Catholic, Muslim, secular, American, Indonesian.
It sounds like a checklist of conflicting ideologies, doesn't it? But for a child, you don't intellectualize that. You just adapt. You learn the codes for each environment. You learn that in this building we pray this way, and in that one we pledge allegiance that way.
He's learning to be a chameleon.
In a way, yes. Or at least he's learning that no single worldview has a monopoly on the truth. And that's a school that becomes incredibly useful later. But as we know, the Indonesia chapter closes.
Right. It's 1971. He's about 10. And he moves back to Hawaii to live with his grandparents so he can attend the Punahou School. This is a very elite, very prestigious private school. A totally different world from Jakarta.
And this transition brings us to, I think, the heaviest emotional beat in the early sources. The return of the father.
It's barely a return, though, is it? It's December 1971. His father comes from Kenya to visit for 1 month, and the notes say, that's it. That's the last time they ever saw each other.
It's a profound moment of separation. Before this, his father was a myth, a story. After this, he's just a memory. And that absence creates this massive vacuum. In his memoir, Dreams from My Father, Obama is very, very open about the identity crisis this triggered.
There's that striking line he writes where he says he struggled with the reality that his father was black as pitch and his mother was white as milk. When he was running around in Indonesia, maybe that didn't matter so much. But as a teenager in Hawaii, it really seems to weigh on him.
Well, adolescence is all about asking, who am I? For Obama, that question was racially and culturally loaded in a way it just isn't for most kids. He didn't fit neatly into the boxes available in 1970s America.
And the sources don't try to sanitize how he dealt with that. He didn't just retreat into the library and study harder.
No, he definitely didn't. This is where we get introduced to the Choom Gang.
Ah, the infamous Choom Gang.
It sounds like a bad 70s movie title. But this was his crew. And the source material is blunt. He admits to using alcohol, marijuana, and even cocaine. But what struck me was his reasoning. He says explicitly that he used drugs to push questions of who I was out of my mind.
So it wasn't just partying, it was self-medication.
That's the key insight. It was anesthesia. He was trying to numb that friction between his two worlds. But here's the paradox. Even while he's struggling internally and, numbing himself, socially he's thriving at Punahou.
How so? Because usually an identity crisis leads to isolation, right?
His classmates noted that he could move between different cliques just effortlessly. One night he's at a party with African-American military personnel and college students blending in there. The next day he's navigating the world of his white, middle-class grandparents.
It's that code switching again. He's doing it socially in Hawaii, just like he did religiously and culturally in Indonesia.
Exactly. He was learning to be comfortable in spaces where he was technically an outsider. He was practicing the art of making himself an insider, no matter whose room he was walking into. That's a survival skill for a teenager, but it is a superpower for a politician.
So let's fast forward a bit. He survives the Choom Gang era. He graduates in '79, heads to the mainland, starts at Occidental College in LA. He actually gives his first public speech there against apartheid.
A little foreshadowing.
Right. Then he transfers to Columbia in New York. But the sources seem to suggest the real making of the man happens when he moves to Chicago in 1985.
This is the crucible. Up until now, he's been a student. He's been observing. Now, he takes a job as the director of the Developing Communities Project, or DCP.
The title sounds impressive, director. It implies a corner office.
It does. But let's look at the reality on the ground. It was a church-based organization on the South Side. When he walked in the door, what were his resources?
Well, looking at the numbers, the staff consisted of him,
one person.
And the budget, $70,000, which for a community organization trying to cover a huge struggling area, that's not much. That barely keeps the lights on.
Right. So he's 24 years old. He's an outsider from Hawaii and New York. He is not from Chicago. And he's tasked with organizing communities in the South Side. This is where the rubber meets the road. By the time he leaves 3 years later, the staff has grown to 13.
Wow.
And the budget is up to $400,000.
That is serious growth. And the sources list the projects: job training, tutoring programs, tenants' rights, and alt-guild gardens. But I want to dig into how he did it. You can't just walk into a neighborhood you don't know and start barking orders.
You absolutely cannot. And this is where the listener concept comes in.
Yeah.
The methodology he used wasn't speeches, it wasn't rallying cries, it was what he called long listening sessions.
This really creates a contrast with the orator-in-chief image we have of him later. So he just spent his time in kitchens and living rooms.
Hours and hours. He sat with people and asked them about their problems. He let them vent. He let them tell their stories about asbestos in the walls or lack of jobs. This does two things. First, it builds trust. You're not an outsider imposing a solution. You're a partner understanding the problem.
And the second thing,
It gave him a granular understanding of what people actually cared about, which is often different from what politicians think they care about. It's a bottom-up approach.
he learned that power in these communities wasn't about money, it was about relationships.
Precisely. And that lesson that you start by listening is the foundation of everything that comes later.
But then we see another pivot. He's successful in Chicago, he's respected, but he decides it's not enough. So in 1988, he enters Harvard Law School.
And talk about a change of scenery. From the Altgeld Gardens housing project to the Ivy League. It's cultural whiplash.
And he doesn't just attend. By 1990, he is elected the president of the Harvard Law Review.
It's that nest. This was national news. The first black president in the Review's history. It put him on the map.
Yeah.
But I want you to really focus on how he won that election, because the source material gives us a detail here that predicts his entire national career.
I know exactly what you're looking at. It wasn't just the liberal students who
No.
voted for him.
No, if he only had the liberals, he might not have won. The sources say he managed to convince a crucial swing block of conservatives to back him. Now, why would conservative law students at Harvard support a guy who had just spent 3 years as a community organizer?
It goes back to that listening skill, doesn't it? There's
Yes.
a quote here from Richard Epstein, a prominent libertarian scholar. He said people on the other side supported Obama because they believed he would give them a fair shake.
A fair shake, that is the golden ticket. They didn't think he agreed with them, they knew he was a liberal, but they trusted that he wouldn't silence them. They trusted that he'd interpret their arguments fairly before, ruling against them.
That is a superpower, especially today, making your opponent feel heard.
It is, and it's a direct through line from his childhood. Remember Indonesia, remember Hawaii? He has been interpreting different worldviews his entire life. He knows how to translate between groups that don't trust each other.
While he's navigating all this at Harvard, he spends a summer back in Chicago at a law firm called Sidley and Austin. And this is where the personal life clicks into place.
Enter Michelle Robinson.
The sources say she was his mentor at the firm in 1989. And honestly, looking at the trajectory, her influence seems to be the anchor he needed. He was this floating, multicultural traveler. She was Chicago, deep roots, South Side family.
Absolutely. She connected him to the community in a way that work alone never could. She gave him a home base, she grounded him. But before he settles down completely, he takes on one more massive operational role.
This is the part of the deep dive where I was most surprised by the sheer scale of the work. I think people forget this chapter. We're talking about Illinois Project vote in 1992.
Yes, he returns to Chicago to direct this campaign. The goal was to register African-American voters to help Carol Moseley Braun run for the Senate.
And the numbers represent a massive scaling up of his ambition. We aren't talking about a few clipboards. They registered 400,000 African Americans.
400,000?
Yeah.
That swings elections. That changes history. Carol Moseley Braun became the first black woman in the Senate, and a lot of analysts credit that surge in registration.
But look at the skill set required to do that. The sources mentioned he was managing a staff of 700 volunteers.
Exactly. This is executive experience. It's logistics, it's motivation, and it's fundraising. The notes say he raised more money than any previous state director for the project. He's walking into rooms with the wealthy, liberal elite of Chicago people like David Axelrod and convincing them to write checks.
So he's got the grassroots game from the housing projects, and now he's mastering the donor game.
He's got both. There's a great quote from John Schmidt, who worked on the fundraising committee. He noticed that at the press conferences, you'd see Jesse Jackson taking the credit. But, quote, Barack was off to the side, and only the people who were close to it knew he had done all the work.
That is a very telling detail. He wasn't chasing the limelight yet. He was chasing the result.
He was building the machine. He understood that the speech is the tip of the iceberg, but the organization is the ice underneath. You don't win without the ice.
So, following Project Vote, he settles into what looks like a very busy but very stable rhythm. He spends 12 years teaching constitutional law at the University of Chicago.
Right, specifically courses on racism and law, so he's deep in the theory.
And simultaneously, he's working at a civil rights firm. Davis, Minor, Barnhill, and Galland.
And the cases he takes are significant. He sues Governor Jim Edgar over the Motor Act, basically forcing the state to make it easier for people to register to vote. He's attacking the problem from the classroom, the courtroom, and the street.
It seems like all the pieces are finally falling into place. He's got the grassroots respect, the elite credentials from Harvard, the fundraising network, the legal background, and the family stability with Michelle.
And he has a story. Remember, he finally published his Dreams from My Father in 1995. Fun little detail in the notes. He actually went to Bali with Michelle to finish writing it so he wouldn't be interrupted.
Writing a memoir in Bali, I mean, if you can pull that off, go for it.
It sounds nice.
Yeah.
But intellectually, publishing that book was the final step in resolving that identity crisis we talked about. By writing it down, he integrated all those fractured parts of himself. Barry from Indonesia, the Chumgang teenager, the community organizer, he wove them into a single narrative.
He defined himself before his opponents could define him.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the end of our timeline today. It is 1995. He announces his candidacy for the Illinois State Senate. He's stepping out of the backroom role of the organizer and onto the ballot.
And the rest, as they say, is history. But looking back at this specific period from birth to that announcement, the takeaway is really powerful. The chaos of his early life, the things that seem like disadvantages, the broken home, the moving around, the weird name, they weren't hindrances. They were the training ground.
It really is incredible. If he had stayed in Hawaii the whole time, or if he'd grown up in Kansas, we probably wouldn't have the Barack Obama we know.
I don't think we would. His career was built on being a bridge between races, as someone with a black father and white mother, a bridge between ideologies like we saw at the Harvard Law Review, and a bridge between the elite and the grassroots. You simply cannot learn to be a bridge if you have only ever stood on one side of the river.
That is such a great visual. It really reframes the whole outsider experience.
It raises a provocative question for all of us, really. We often look for stability and a straight path to success. We think, I need to go to the right prep school, then the Ivy League, then the corporate firm.
Right. The checklist life. We want the resume to look perfect.
Exactly. And sure, Obama checked the Ivy League box eventually. But I want you to consider this. If he had taken that standard straight path from day one, would he have developed that listening skill?
Would he have been able to sit in a kitchen in Altgeld Gardens and actually connect with a single mother? Or would he have just been another guy in a suit looking at his watch?
Precisely. Was the chaotic, multicultural outsider childhood actually the essential ingredient that made him effective? It suggests that maybe the detours in our own lives, the weird jobs, the unexpected moves, the times we feel like complete outsiders, might actually be where we're building our most valuable skills.
I love that. The things that make you feel like you don't fit in might be exactly what prepares you to lead.
It is certainly what happened here.
Well, that is plenty to chew on. From beefsteak in Jakarta to registering 400,000 voters in Chicago, what a journey. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the making of the man before the presidency. As always, take these nuggets of insight and apply them to your own world. Thanks for listening.